You can spend your entire life trying to heal and still feel that something inside you remains wounded, an ancient pain, often nameless, a void that will not fill no matter how much you read, meditate, talk, or work. Maybe you have already tried therapy. Maybe you plunged into spiritual journeys, searching for answers in the stars, in books, in others. Yet still, in the silence, one question returns. Why do I still feel this way? Carl Jung said that our psyche is shaped by the most fundamental figures of childhood, and among all of them there is one that is central, visceral, inescapable, the mother, not only the woman who gave birth to us, but the psychic image formed from her. The real mother is only a reflection. What remains in us, even when she is gone or far away, is what Jung called the mother archetype. Perhaps you are not stuck on your mother herself, but on your idea of her, on the unconscious projection that still lives within you, appearing when you fear not being accepted, when you try to please everyone, when you enter emotional relationships where you are treated like a fragile child or like someone who needs to be saved. Perhaps the mother who lives inside you is no longer the person she is today, but the one you knew when you didn't even know how to speak. The mother archetype is a double-edged force. It can be life and death, healing and poison. Jung said that within each of us there is a primordial mother, a symbolic representation of the feminine, that nurtures, cares, welcomes, but also suffocates, devours, imprisons. In different cultures, this image appears as Isis, Mary, Gaia, but also as Kali, Medusa, Lilith. This ambivalence is essential, and the most important thing, all these images, even if you've never heard of them, live within you. Now consider, can you distinguish your real mother from your inner mother, the woman with her human limitations from the psychic image you created of her? Because until you make that distinction, you will continue demanding from her or from others what no human being can offer: archetypal perfection, absolute unconditional love, eternal nourishment. And that is an illusion. Perhaps you missed something in childhood, affection that never came, presence that failed, listening that never happened, and so the unconscious created an idealized, almost divine image of what should have been, and you spent your life searching for that image in people, in masters, in partners, even in your own children. But no one can fill the void of an ideal mother, because she does not exist. What exists is the real woman, with her own story, her own wounds, her own traumas. And what also exists is your unconscious, trying to compensate for that absence with fantasy. Jung invites us to do one simple yet extremely difficult thing: to de-idealize. That does not mean denying love or erasing good memories. It means accepting that our mother is human, and by doing so, we begin to dissolve the prison of expectation. Have you noticed how even as an adult, you often still behave like a child in front of your mother? How you seek approval, fear disappointing her, or feel anger at things that happened 20 or 30 years ago? This happens because you are not relating to her in the present. You are dealing with the archetypal mother that lives in your unconscious, and until you recognize her, she dominates you. How many times have you waited for your mother to be different, for her to change, finally understand you, apologize, embrace you as you always dreamed? But what if that waiting is the root of your pain? What if liberation comes when you stop waiting and begin to understand? The mother archetype is not just an idea, it is an energy. And like any psychic energy, it needs to be recognized and integrated. When we do not do this, it transforms into shadow. It appears in your relationships, in how you care for others, or in the way you demand that others care for you. It can emerge as a compulsion to help, to save, to control, or as chronic pain, hidden resentment, an inexplicable weight on your chest. And perhaps the hardest question you can ask yourself now is, how much of my current pain comes from my real mother? And how much comes from the image I built of her? How much am I still trapped in the fantasy that if she changes, I will be happy? As long as we wait for our mother to be what the archetype promises, perfect, infallible, loving at every moment, we remain children, emotional children even with adult bodies. True maturity begins when we stop demanding and start observing. When we recognize that the emptiness we feel is no longer her responsibility, but our own journey. A journey that requires the courage to abandon the idealized image and in its place, build a new relationship, sometimes with her, sometimes only with the memory of her, but always, always with the part of us that is still stuck in the past. Perhaps your mother was wonderful. Perhaps she was absent. Perhaps she was abusive. It doesn't matter. What matters now is what you will do with her image inside you, because that image, even if unconscious, runs your impulses, your choices, your loves, and until you face it, it will continue to write your story for you. Carl Jung wrote that the psyche is autonomous, and whoever does not look inside is doomed to live destiny as if it were chance. The image of the mother that lives within you must be brought to light, because it is there in that archetypal territory that the key to your liberation lies. You grew up observing the world with a child's eyes. Everything she saw, felt, absorbed was registered, not only in memory, but in the soul. And perhaps, most of the time, you don't even realize you are still reacting like that child in situations that today require maturity. It's as if part of you stopped in time. Carl Jung taught us that everything we repress, deny, or cannot deal with becomes part of our shadow. And a large part of that shadow is inherited, not genetically but psychologically. It is passed down from generation to generation through unconscious behaviors, unexplained silences, unhealed wounds. When you were little, you learned to adapt to survive. And in doing so, you had to hide parts of yourself to be accepted, loved, protected. Now imagine this. Your mother did that too. She also had a childhood, also had to adapt, also had to hide parts of herself to survive. The difference is that perhaps she never had the tools to look at her own shadow. So she carried it, on her back, in her words, in her gestures. And unknowingly, she let you carry it too. Perhaps your mother was controlling. Perhaps she was cold or overly emotional. Perhaps she feared rejection, feared failure, feared not being good enough. But instead of dealing with those fears, she hid them. And when you were born, those fears, those defenses, those voids, became the backdrop of your formation. Your mother's shadow is in you when you feel guilty for saying no, when you sabotage yourself, when you demand too much of yourself, when you are afraid to trust, when you find yourself caring for everyone except yourself, when you feel ashamed of your anger, your sexuality, your ambition, when you try to be perfect so that no one will abandon you, when you smile to hide the pain. All of this can be a remnant of what she could not embrace in herself. The shadow is not evil. It is simply what was excluded from consciousness. The problem is that when we do not recognize what is there, we are dominated by it. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And perhaps that is what is happening now. You feel that something repeats, patterns, pains, relationships, and you don't understand why. But pause and think. What did your mother hide from the world? What did she avoid? What did she criticize in others most intensely? Often, what we reject most in another is precisely what we deny in ourselves. And what your mother could not look at in herself, she may have projected onto you. This is not blame. It is psychic structure. You grew up molding yourself to please, to avoid conflict, to not be a burden. You grew up absorbing her expectations as if they were your own. Perhaps she said, "You must be strong," or "Don't cry," or "Don't trust anyone." Maybe she said nothing, but you felt it. You felt you had to be something you were not. And over time you believed that was who you were. And today, do you feel you can be yourself everywhere? Or do you feel you are always performing, always trying not to disappoint someone, even if that someone is no longer present? Your mother's shadow appears in you as constant self-criticism, as fear of failing, as perfectionism, as a sense of always being in debt. And it also appears when you repeat behaviors that, when you were a child, you swore you would never have. You know that moment when you catch yourself saying something and realize, that sounded exactly like my mother. That is not a coincidence. It is the unconscious. It is the reflection of a part of your psyche still serving the other's emotional loyalty. There is a part of you that believes that to be loyal to your mother, you must carry what she carried. This is a silent, unconscious form of bond. And Jung called this unconscious identification with the other's unconscious. You live without knowing it, the life she never lived. You feel the guilt she repressed. You hold the sadness she swallowed, but you don't have to continue this cycle. It is not about pointing fingers. It is not about saying, "It's my mother's fault." Jung made it clear that blaming parents is childish. True transformation begins when we look honestly and say, "This is in me, and now it is my responsibility to integrate it." This is what he called the individuation process, becoming who you truly are, recognizing inherited parts but consciously choosing which ones you wish to carry forward. Perhaps you never heard your mother say she was afraid. Perhaps she always tried to appear strong, but you felt it. You absorbed it. And maybe that is why today you also try to seem strong all the time. Perhaps that is why it is so hard to ask for help, so difficult to cry, so hard to stop. But what if now you took a different step? What if instead of repeating or rejecting your mother, you could look at her as a mirror of the strengths and weaknesses that also live in you? And what if, by recognizing that, you began making choices that truly belong to you? Carl Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of the parents." Perhaps what weighs on you is not only your story, but hers, not yet digested, still pulsing, still looking for a place. You are not here to carry anyone's pain. You are here to heal your own. But for that, you need to recognize what is not yours, and yet lives in you. The inherited shadow needs to be seen, felt, embraced. Only then does it cease to dominate your life. And the moment you do that, something changes. You stop being the unconscious continuation of your mother and begin to be yourself. You grow up believing you are free, believing your choices are conscious, your feelings authentic, the love you give and expect in relationships natural. But gradually, life shows patterns, repetitions, relationships that seem to change name, face, setting, but at heart are the same. And when you look more closely, you realize that you are reacting not to the other, but to an ancient script. This is where what Jung called the maternal complex comes in. A complex is like an autonomous emotional core that lives in the unconscious. It forms from emotionally charged experiences, usually tied to childhood, and becomes an invisible filter. You see the world, others, and yourself through it. The maternal complex is born from the primary relationship with the mother figure. And if that relationship was ambiguous, made of love, but also of fear, of closeness and rejection, of care and demand, the complex becomes a powerful force that can act throughout life, influencing how you relate to everything feminine, internal, receptive, and to your own emotional identity. For women, this can manifest as a compulsion to care for others, nullifying themselves, an unconscious desire to be the perfect mother to compensate for the mother they never had. Or, conversely, a deep rejection of their own sensitivity, as if becoming tough were the only way not to repeat the maternal destiny. For men, the maternal complex can appear as idealization of the feminine, a constant search for a woman who saves, who understands everything, who embraces unconditionally. Or the opposite, a permanent distrust of women, a sense of threat, a fear of being dominated or disappointed by them. In both cases, you are not dealing with the real woman, but with the unconscious image of the mother. Perhaps you have felt this, a difficulty in surrendering, an invisible demand, an emotional dependence disguised as love, a fear of disappointing the other that paralyzes. All of this can be the complex acting, and more than that, keeping you in the role of child even when the relationship demands adult presence. It is common for people living under the influence of the maternal complex to feel intense emotional oscillation. One moment they want closeness, fusion, embrace. The next they feel suffocated, need distance, anger. It is the echo of the ambivalent childhood relationship, the child who wanted the lap but feared control, who sought love but found demand, who needed the mother but did not know if she could be trusted. And the most painful thing, often you project this onto the people you love. Your partner becomes unknowingly the new maternal figure. Your spouse ends up carrying the expectation of being the mother you never had. Your friends, children, co-workers, all can at some point carry the burden of what your soul has not yet resolved. You realize you are trapped in this complex when you notice you are always interpreting the world through the same wound, when a simple critique becomes abandonment, when temporary distance triggers an irrational fear of rejection, when an unexpected compliment breeds distrust. It is not the other causing this. It is the child in you reacting as she did to your mother. Jung warned that The maternal complex can have destructive effects if not recognized. It can keep the adult emotionally immature, dependent, unable to establish healthy bonds or clear boundaries. It can generate chronic guilt, a paralyzing fear of failure, or a constant need to prove oneself, as if on some level you were still trying to deserve the love you didn't receive as you needed. But there is something even more subtle. Sometimes the complex does not appear as pain or conflict, but as an ideal. You believe you need to be the perfect caregiver, the impeccable friend, the tireless professional, and unknowingly, you are trying to reproduce what your mother expected of herself. You inherit not only the pains, but also the demands. And this too is a form of prison. Recognizing this requires courage, because it means accepting that not all your feelings are spontaneous, that many of your most intense reactions have deep ancient roots unrelated to the present. But that is precisely where true freedom begins. When you stop being driven by these unconscious cores and start observing them. It is not about eliminating the complex. Complexes are part of the psyche and will always be there, but they lose their power when you recognize them. When, instead of acting automatically, you breathe, you look, you ask yourself, what I am feeling now really belongs to this situation, or am I responding to something much older? This simple question can be a turning point, because often what is at stake is not what the person did or didn't do. It is the sensation of being once again in front of the mother. And every time you confuse the present with the past, the complex is in control. You can begin to change this now. You can observe your relationships more attentively. You can perceive which patterns repeat. You can embrace your inner child, not as an eternal victim, but as a legitimate part of you that is calling for awareness. And you can, finally, give yourself what you sought all, your life, the right to be whole. To be whole is not to be without wounds. It is to know where they come from, to know that you can choose a different path even if the scars remain. It is to understand that you no longer need to repeat, nor compensate, nor please. You can simply be, and perhaps for the first time, feel what it is to love, without being trapped in a role that isn't yours. You look at the people around you and think you're seeing who they are, but in fact, very often you are seeing who you need them to be. You're seeing projections, unconscious images cast onto the other without realizing it. And few projections are as intense, distorted, and hard to see as those linked to your mother. You don't live only with others. You live with what you carry inside you. And if inside you there is an unresolved image of your mother, part of you will continue trying to rediscover it, recreate it, correct it, in the most unlikely places. This happens because what you couldn't emotionally process with your mother, you project onto the world, onto partners, bosses, friends, authority figures. It's as if, unconsciously, you were always staging the same drama, seeking approval, fearing rejection, trying to prove your worth. You feel you need to be seen, that you need to be accepted. And when someone criticizes you, what hurts is not the critique itself, but the echo of an ancient wound. It hurts as it did when you tried to get your mother's attention and she didn't hear you, when you needed her and she wasn't there, or when she was there, but didn't see who you really were. Projection is an attempt to resolve in the present what remained unfinished in the past. It's as if your psyche says, maybe now I will succeed, maybe now you will receive unconditional love, maybe now you will feel seen, maybe now someone will choose you, not out of convenience, but out of love. But this never works, because the other is not your mother. They aren't here to heal you, and when they fail your secret expectation, the frustration is immense. Jung said that everything that remains unconscious in us ends up being lived as destiny, and that is exactly what happens with projections. You think you are getting to know someone, but you are only re-encountering the wounded mother inside you, and what begins as a desire for connection turns into a repetition of pain. Perhaps that is why you are drawn to emotionally unavailable people. Perhaps that is why you insist on unbalanced relationships. Perhaps that is why you feel intense anger toward people who, rationally, do not deserve so much emotional charge. The intensity of your reaction is not in the present. It lies in your history. It is very hard to admit that we are projecting, because to do that we must accept that we are not seeing the other clearly. We are seeing through the filter of our unmet needs, and that confusion is painful, because if we don't see the other as they are, we are not seen as we really are either. The relationship becomes a mirror game, and no one truly touches anyone. The most common projections of the maternal image happen in intimate relationships. You feel you must be perfect to be loved, or you demand that the other always be available, understanding, present. Any absence becomes abandonment, any conflict becomes rejection, any criticism triggers despair. But behind all this, it's not the current partner, it's the mother who didn't see you, didn't hear you, or couldn't embrace you as you needed. This dynamic intensifies when you start demanding from the other what you never received, when you expect them to know how to care for you without you saying a word, to understand your pain without you showing it. And if they don't do it, the frustration is deep, as if a piece of you were abandoned once more. It is cruel to live like this, because no one can fill the void you carry, not out of malice, but out of impossibility. No human relationship can heal the wound of the child who expected the perfect mother. That does not exist. What exists is the recognition of the illusion, the recognition of the magical expectation that, when brought to consciousness, loses its power. There is no liberation in the fantasy that someone will come to complete you. Liberation begins when you stop seeking in others what only you can find within yourself. When you understand that the inner mother, the one who still demands, still waits, still gets frustrated, no longer needs to dominate your life. It is at this point that you begin to see the other as they really are, imperfect, human, limited, just like you. And by doing so, you begin to build true relationships. Relationships where there is no hidden demand, no invisible expectation, no projection of ancient ghosts. Projection does not disappear overnight, but it dissolves little by little as you expand consciousness, as you observe your feelings with curiosity, not judgment, as you honestly ask, what am I expecting from the other that in truth I am still expecting from my mother? This question can change the course of your life, because when you stop projecting, you begin to act, you begin to choose with clarity, you begin to love with maturity, and more importantly, you begin to take responsibility for what you feel, no longer as a victim of the past, but as a creator of the present. This is a fundamental turning point on the path of individuation, when you recognize that no one else needs to be your mother, neither your partner, nor your therapist, nor your children. You begin to occupy that space within yourself. You begin to become the internal figure that welcomes, listens, supports. You can look at yourself with compassion. You can give yourself the presence that was lacking. You can embrace your anger, your neediness, your sadness, without judging yourself for it. You can stop demanding from the world what the world is not here to give. And, in that silent movement, something new begins to emerge. A relationship with yourself based on truth. The truth that your mother, with all that she was and was not, no longer defines what you live today. Her image, her wound, her presence or absence, can be honored, understood, integrated, but they no longer need to be projected. The world is full of people who can touch you, inspire you, love you, but you will only recognize them when you stop seeking in them what was missing back then. And when you do that, you will discover something powerful, that there is no one left to blame, no one left to save, no one left to follow, because for the first time, you are ready to walk alone. There comes a moment when blaming no longer makes sense. The weight of absence, of pain, of demand, all of this becomes part of a broader background. You begin to notice that your mother is, above all, human, that behind the expectations you projected onto her was someone trying to handle her own shadows, her own voids. And that true healing does not happen when she changes, but when you stop judging her, when you begin to integrate her. To integrate does not mean to justify. It is not to say what she did was right. It is to recognize that what she did or failed to do belongs to her story. But how that lives within you now is your responsibility. Transformation begins when you stop seeing yourself as someone molded, wounded, shaped by the mother, and start seeing yourself as someone who, from all of that, can choose what to do with what was received. Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming who you are, not who others projected onto you. But this process is only possible when you accept looking at your mother with clear eyes, without idolization and without rancor, just with truth. For a long time you may have oscillated between two poles, the perfect mother you expected to exist and the imperfect mother who hurt you. But both are partial images. Reality is more complex. Your mother is not just one thing. She is made of fragments, of light and shadow, of love and fear, of successes and repetitions. It is hard to see this without judgment, because what the child feels when wounded by the one who should protect them is not ordinary anger. It is betrayal, a profound psychic confusion. How can someone who should be a source of life also become a cause of pain? How can you trust the world when the first, most essential bond was unstable, ambivalent, or distant? But it is precisely for this reason that the work of integration is so essential, because without it, this ambivalence remains alive, contaminating everything. You love, but you distrust. You care, but you feel exhausted. You approach, but you close off. And as much as it seems you are dealing with others, deep down you are dealing with your mother, or with the image of her that still lives inside you. To integrate means accepting that perhaps she did not have the resources you wished, that perhaps she did the best she could with the consciousness she had, and more difficult still, that perhaps you are repeating similar patterns without realizing it, because what you most condemn in her may be alive, subtly, in how you treat yourself, in how you demand of yourself the same perfection she demanded, in how you silence your pain, just as she silenced hers. Integration begins when you recognize that there is a part of you that still waits for her to say something, for her to repent, for her to see you, for her to apologize, for her to feel what you felt. But that moment may never come, and it doesn't have to, because the most important reconciliation does not happen outside. It happens within. When you stop waiting for something from your mother, you finally begin to listen to yourself. You begin to notice what that child needed and still needs, and for the first time, someone is willing to give it to her. You, not as a substitute, but as a witness, as a real presence, as a conscious adult who welcomes without denying, without rushing to solve. Jung said we become truly ourselves not by reaching the light, but by recognizing our darkness. And on the path of healing, the figure of the mother represents exactly this. The need to look within, to what was denied, repressed, projected, idealized. Not to return to the past, but so that the past finally stops commanding the present. You no longer need to carry what she could not resolve. You no longer need to be the child who saves, the daughter who takes care of everything, the adult who carries guilt that is not theirs. True loyalty is not in repeating pain, but in breaking the cycle. Looking at your mother with truth is also looking at yourself with maturity. And maturity in the Jungian sense is this: being whole, being able to hold contradictions, to accept that there is pain and love in the same place, that there is longing and anger, gratitude and frustration, embrace and absence, all at once, and that this is not confusion. It is human complexity. You can today end this search. You can stop trying to be seen, approved, validated. You can breathe and realize there is no one left to convince, that what your mother didn't see, you can see now, that what she didn't name, you can name, that what she could not feel, you can feel. And in doing so, you are not betraying your story. You are honoring your existence. This is the deepest shift, when instead of resisting the image of the mother that existed, you accept her, not as a definitive reference, but as part of something greater, as an important chapter, but not the last, of your trajectory. You cease to be the character of a repeated drama and become the author of a new story. Nothing changes outside when this shift happens. Your mother remains who she is. The world stays as it has always been, but something changes profoundly inside you. The need to justify yourself disappears. The urgency to prove your worth dissolves. Guilt loses its power. And in its place something silent and immense is born, a sense of belonging to yourself. You are at last whole, and for the first time, you can live, not from the wound, but from awareness, not in reaction to the past, but in creation of the present, not to please the missing mother, but to embrace the being you are. There is a silent instant in every self-knowledge journey when you realize the wound will not go away. It does not disappear. It does not erase. It is not forgotten. It remains. But something fundamental changes. It ceases to govern you. This is the moment you understand that to heal is not to eliminate pain, but to transform the relationship you have with it. And at the center of this transformation is the figure of your mother, or rather the internal image you constructed of her, carried, fought against, protected, and perhaps without realizing, continued to feed. As long as you remain bound by judgment, she should have done differently. She ruined my life. She will never understand. You remain tied to your mother through pain, and it is a bond as strong as love, sometimes stronger. Judging your mother is an unconscious way of maintaining the illusion of control, of believing that if she changes, if she acknowledges, if she apologizes, then something inside you will reorganize. But that never comes from the other. Reorganization begins when you give yourself what she could not offer. When you stop judging, you start seeing. Seeing the woman behind the mother. Seeing the stories she never told. The fears she could not name. The choices she made not out of malice but out of lack of consciousness. And seeing does not mean forgiving in the moral sense, it means understanding in the psychological sense. It is then that the archetypal image of the mother begins to dissolve. She ceases to be the all-powerful figure, the cause of everything, and becomes what she really is, a fragment of your story, a symbol that, once integrated, no longer needs to be projected or combated. The childhood pain may have been real, the absences, the unspoken words, the confusing gestures, all left marks. But now, you decide what to do with those marks. You can use them as an eternal excuse, or you can use them as a path, as a trail, as fertile soil where something new can sprout. And that is where individuation begins, not as an abstract concept, but as a state of being. You stop trying to be what was expected. You stop demanding. You stop carrying. You meet parts of yourself that were hidden, anger, desire, tenderness, potency, and instead of excluding them, you integrate them. There is no enlightenment without shadow. Jung knew this. We do not become conscious adults by denying the past, but by deeply recognizing what it taught us, and what still calls for our attention. You do not need to love your mother to heal. You do not need to live with her. You do not need a peaceful relationship. You do not need to accept what was done. You only need to recognize she is part of you. She is in your body, in your impulses, in your emotional habits, and everything you reject in her, you reject in yourself. To integrate is to give place to the inner mother, not as an ideal, not as an enemy, but as a symbolic figure that can finally occupy the space it deserves, neither greater nor smaller, just real. Maturity begins in this gesture, when you tell yourself, enough of seeking outside what was missing inside, enough of waiting for recognition, enough of fleeing from neediness, enough of transferring your pain onto the world. You become capable of caring for yourself, of listening to your own pain without losing yourself in it, of embracing your story without needing it to change, of living with the loving presence of someone who chooses at every step not to repeat the cycle. And this, in the end, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Not the ideal love you never received, but the freedom to be who you are, even if childhood. Said otherwise, you do not need to heal from your mother. You only need to recognize how much she still lives in you, and decide with consciousness what to do with that. Now that you know, what do you choose to carry from here on? You have come this far, perhaps in silence, perhaps with tears, perhaps with memories that came unbidden. And all of that is part of the process, because looking at your mother's image within us is also looking at the beginning of everything. It is returning to the origin, not to dwell in the past, but to understand what still moves us without our knowledge. The relationship with the mother, on some level, touches all others. She is the first effective language we learn, the first mirror, the first boundary. And for that very reason, she is also the first portal we need to cross to become true adults. Carl Jung reminded us that the path of individuation is not a path of perfection, but of wholeness. And to be whole means recognizing our roots, even if they are twisted, wounded, or fragile, and from them choosing to grow. Your mother is no longer responsible for your pain, just as you no longer need to wait for her to repair what she couldn't do differently. Life is here now, and it calls you not to fix the past, but to do something new with it. If you can take this step, to integrate instead of judging, to understand instead of repeating, to look inward instead of projecting, you free yourself. And by freeing yourself, you also free those who came before. Because healing is not only yours, it echoes backward and forward in time. You become the link that interrupts the chain, that breathes deeply, that chooses another path. And that, perhaps, is what we call maturity, or true love, or, who knows, simply presence. You are here, whole, ready. Now it's up to you.